It's funny how the universe hands you these utterly unforgettable movie moments, the kind that burn themselves into your memory. And for me, that moment was 17-year-old Brett Sterling being marched off in handcuffs, while his mother, Rhonda Sterling, the self-proclaimed Queen of Laurel Creek, shrieked at the police like a banshee whose tiara had been snatched. Rhonda, of course, was in her perfectly pressed royal blue blazer, the one she always wore to HOA meetings, her brass HOA president badge catching the harsh afternoon sun like some medal of sovereign power. And her face, oh God, her face was a furious, blotchy crimson as she jabbed her meticulously manicured finger right at Detective Miller's chest. "You cannot do this! I run this neighborhood!" she screamed, her voice hitting a pitch that probably shattered a few picture windows down the street. "I know the mayor, I know the chief, you will all be fired by sunrise." Meanwhile, her precious Brett, even with his hands cuffed behind his back, had the sheer, unadulterated nerve to flash a cocky, entitled smirk over his shoulder at the small crowd that was slowly pooling out onto the sidewalks. That arrogant look hadn't budged, not even an inch. "This is all a massive mistake," he called out, the sound dripping with the same spoiled contempt he'd been using for months. "Mom's already called our lawyer. I'll be back home for dinner. You'll see." For nearly 2 years, most of us in Laurel Creek had simply tiptoed around the Sterlings, afraid to speak a single word against the self-anointed royalty of our cul-de-sac. But now, as they peeked out from behind their sheer linen curtains and their half-opened oak doors, the neighbors were quietly watching, witnessing the spectacular, karmic downfall of the family that had treated our entire community like their own personal, petty kingdom. Justice had finally rolled into our pristine little suburb. But to truly understand how we reached this cinematic climax, I need to rewind just a few months. I had just managed to buy my first home on Juniper Lane, a sweet, newly renovated place in this picture-perfect suburban bubble with its perfectly manicured zoysia lawns, its faux colonial street lamps, and those damned HOA rule placards posted at every corner like the 10 Commandments of conformity. I thought I'd struck real gold, finally achieving that slice of the American dream everyone talks about, until my packages started vanishing. At first I brushed it off, you know. A missing Amazon box here, a delivery delay there. The tracking number would confidently declare, "Delivered front porch." But my porch was always empty when I pulled into the driveway after work. I figured it was just some unlucky mix-up, maybe a random porch pirate from the outside. Because Laurel Creek had this ironclad reputation as one of the safest enclaves in the city, thanks entirely to Rhonda Sterling's tyrannical, iron-fisted homeowners association rule, but after the 5th disappearance in a single month, including a new, expensive power tool I desperately needed, I started asking around. My sweet elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kim, who lived directly across the street and always had the most beautiful lavender bushes, was out pruning them when I approached her. The moment I mentioned my missing deliveries, her hands just froze mid-clip. "Oh, dear heart," she whispered, her eyes nervously flicking toward the massive, intimidating stone house at the end of the lane, the Sterling compound. You might want to look into that Sterling boy. I've seen him walking around a lot lately, usually right after the brown truck leaves." She wouldn't say another word, but the sheer, visible terror in her gaze as it lingered in the direction of Rhonda's house said everything I needed to hear. The fear was thick enough to cut with a knife. That night, I didn't hesitate. I ordered a professional, high-definition security camera system, the kind with local storage and facial recognition. 2 days later, my answer arrived, delivered in stunning, crystal-clear 4K. The footage showed Brett Sterling, this lanky, privileged kid, swaggering up my walkway as if he owned the entire street, grabbing the mid-sized box off my porch in broad daylight and simply strolling off, not even bothering to look around or check for witnesses. He actually dared to whistle a cheerful little tune while he did it, just like he was picking up his own legitimate mail. I replayed that clip 4 times, each viewing sending my blood pressure spiking higher. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't some kid making a dumb one-time mistake. This was pure corrosive entitlement. The HOA president's son was treating our entire neighborhood like his personal, complimentary delivery service. I made a terrible mistake then. I marched straight to the Sterling house, phone clutched in hand, determined to have a rational, Adult conversation and just get my stolen property back. Maybe even a promise that it would stop. Rhonda Sterling opened the door with that trademark power stance and the synthetic, strained smile she always wore like a shield of armor. "Well, hello there, new neighbor," she cooed, her voice saccharine enough to give you a toothache. "What can Laurel Creek's finest do for you today?" I told her calmly about the missing packages and held up my phone, showing her the irrefutable video evidence. In an instant, that fake, polished friendliness evaporated. Her face hardened like granite. "That is quite a malicious accusation," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous, reptilian hiss. "And frankly, I find it deeply insulting that you would come to my home making these wild, unproven claims about my son, a child." I tried to maintain my composure, pointing out that I had crystal-clear video proof and that I only wanted the theft to stop. But Rhonda just crossed her arms over her expensive blazer and gave me the look, the one she perfected over years, designed to make people wilt and shrink into themselves. "Brett is an absolute star student. He's captain of his state champion lacrosse team, and he volunteers weekly at the soup kitchen," she drawled out slowly, patronizingly, as if she were lecturing a kindergartner. "He would never do anything so petty or beneath him. Perhaps you should look more carefully at your delivery confirmations before running around making baseless, community-agitating accusations." Then came the knife twist, the veiled threat wrapped in that insidious HOA language. "I would strongly suggest you choose your battles very carefully in this neighborhood, darling. As president of the Homeowners Association, I take false accusations and thinly veiled harassment against residents, especially when they target outstanding young people like my son, very seriously." And of course, the theft didn't stop. It actually got worse. Over the next week, Brett became ridiculously bolder. He'd brazenly steal boxes in the middle of the afternoon, and he even waved directly at my camera once, a slow, mocking salute, treating the whole thing like a ridiculous joke only he was in on. The breaking point, the moment I knew I had to escalate this to a different level, came when I actually caught him red-handed with Mrs. Kim's medication delivery box tucked carelessly under his arm. I yelled across the street at him, a gut-deep shout, and he turned with that infuriating smirk. "Hey, mister," he called back, the arrogance practically dripping off his designer hoodie. "My mom runs this entire neighborhood. I'm basically untouchable, everyone knows that. Maybe you should move somewhere else if you don't like how things work around here, huh?" Then he actually laughed, a genuine, carefree laugh, as he sauntered away with stolen property, absolutely certain that nothing and no one could ever touch him. That's when the truth hit me, with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't about a few missing packages anymore. This was about power. This was never just about stolen cardboard boxes. This was about a family who genuinely, deeply believed they were above the rules, above the law simply because of a petty, insignificant neighborhood title. Once I started talking to the other residents, the people who had lived in fear for years, the truth came spilling out fast. What I learned was both infuriating and honestly heartbreaking. The Millers had lost 3 packages in 2 weeks. The elderly Mr. Henderson, who was mostly housebound, had his arthritis medication stolen right off his porch. Mrs. Kim confirmed the one I'd just witnessed. "Everyone knows it's Brett," Mrs. Kim told me in a low, conspiratorial voice, her eyes darting toward the Sterling house as if the walls themselves had ears. "But nobody wants to be Rhonda's next target. She can make life a living hell if you cross her. Last spring, she tried to fine the O'Connells $1,000 because their decorative mailbox was the wrong shade of pewter. $1,000 for the wrong shade of pewter. That was the final piece of the puzzle. That was all the motivation I needed. I rallied 6 of the most fed-up neighbors, people who were just as exhausted by Rhonda's psychological intimidation as I was. Together, we decided to fight back, but not with fear or complaints. We would use something stronger, evidence. We created a secure group chat, synchronized our various cameras, and started tracking Brett's every movement around Laurel Creek. Within a mere 3 days, we had collected an overwhelming, damning file. We had synchronized footage from 5 different homes showing Brett strolling up to porches like they were his personal outdoor shopping mall. Box after box, house after house. The pattern of criminality was undeniable. Armed with that irrefutable evidence, I formally requested a meeting with the full HOA board. Rhonda responded exactly as the petty tyrant she was. She stacked the deck. She scheduled the hearing for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, when almost everyone was at work, and made absolutely sure her most loyal, bootlicking supporters filled the board seats. This is clearly just a personal, coordinated vendetta by residents who simply do not appreciate the exceptionally high standards I've worked so hard to maintain in this community, she declared, her voice radiating that fake, self-important presidential air. Every single time we presented a piece of video proof, she would wave it away with a dismissive gloved hand, declaring the videos were obviously doctored and our unified statements were nothing more than coordinated harassment aimed at a minor. When I attempted to play the clear-as-day footage on a projector, she flat-out ruled it inadmissible and threatened to levy fines against me for defamation and disrupting an official proceeding. The entire meeting was a preposterous performance, a total sham. But it taught me the most crucial lesson. You cannot beat a narcissist or a petty tyrant on their own rigged turf. You have to take the fight somewhere they don't control. That very night, I spent 6 solid hours compiling every single video clip, every synchronized timestamp, every screenshot, and every neighbor statement into a single, comprehensive and ruthlessly organized report. Then, I drove straight out of Laurel Creek and into the city to the Central Police Station. Detective Sarah Miller sat across from me in a small interview room as I laid out the meticulously organized binder. She watched the key video compilations, she read through the timestamps, and she slowly nodded, her expression growing more serious with every page. "This is actually really impressive work, sir," she said, a small professional smile cracking at the corner of her mouth. Multiple angles, clear facial IDs, corroborated statements from numerous victims. We can absolutely legally work with this. The investigation moved faster than I had ever dared to hope. Within 2 days, Detective Miller had interviewed several of the key neighbors, confirming the pattern of theft and the years of intimidation. But then, she uncovered something far bigger than porch theft. She called me 2 days later and calmly explained, "Mr. Bennett, it seems Brett wasn't just stealing for kicks or even just for pocket money. He'd established an active, quite sophisticated online operation selling the stolen goods, everything from electronics to designer sunglasses, on various anonymous marketplaces. That discovery immediately bumped everything, from simple petty theft up to trafficking in stolen property and organized retail crime. When Detective Miller called me to tell me they were finalizing the arrest warrant and would be picking him up the following day, my chest swelled with an utterly pure, undeniable sense of satisfaction. "We'll be picking him up right after school lets out tomorrow afternoon," she said. "With the evidence you provided, we are completely confident about the prosecution." The next day, I made sure I was doing some conspicuously visible gardening in my front yard when the 2 police cruisers quietly pulled up to the imposing Sterling compound. The sight of Brett being read his Miranda rights while Rhonda Sterling shrieked at the top of her lungs was truly better than any blockbuster movie premiere I could ever pay for. "This is an outrage. This is harassment. I'll have all of your badges. Do you even know who I am?" She howled as the uniformed officers professionally escorted her utterly silent son to the back of the patrol car. But Detective Miller remained perfectly calm and stone-faced, explaining to Rhonda that her son was being charged with multiple counts of theft, trafficking in stolen property, and organized retail crime. And the look on Rhonda Sterling's face, that moment when the reality sank in, when she realized her precious, flimsy little HOA title meant absolutely nothing to actual, real-world law enforcement, that look, my friends, was utterly priceless. That very night, the neighborhood came alive with a feeling we hadn't experienced in years: relief. People actually stepped out of their homes, laughing, talking freely across the lawns. Mrs. Kim immediately started a formal, legal petition to have Rhonda Sterling removed from the HOA board for abuse of power and misuse of community funds. Within 48 hours, more than 85% of the residents had signed. Neighbors who had been silent for years now lined up to tell their stories about Rhonda's ridiculous, illegal fines, her petty harassment campaigns, and her outright threats against anyone who dared to defy her little, pathetic kingdom. Brett's court date arrived quickly. The evidence, our evidence, was so overwhelming and so meticulously organized that his high-priced lawyer wisely advised him to enter a plea of guilty. He was sentenced to 6 months in a juvenile rehabilitation facility, 2 years of supervised probation, and the part that felt the most gratifying, restitution totaling over $5,000 to his victims. All of us. I will never forget Rhonda's face in that courtroom, the way the color simply drained from her cheeks as the judge delivered the sentence with cold, unyielding precision. Brett wasn't untouchable anymore. In fact, he was utterly crushed. The judge even added a wonderfully poetic touch to his punishment. Mandatory. Extended community service in a specific local program focused on property crime prevention and victim impact statements. Brett would spend months of his precious summer explaining to other wayward teenagers why stealing wasn't worth the steep, permanent price he paid. Rhonda made one final desperate, emotional plea about her son's bright future and his lacrosse scholarship, but the judge shut her down with a firm, resounding reminder that actions have consequences. Regardless of who your mother is or what minor, meaningless title she holds in a homeowners association. And just like that, the suffocating, manipulative iron grip the Sterling family held over Laurel Creek was completely and permanently broken. I stayed in the neighborhood, but it felt different, lighter. Ours again. Rhonda eventually resigned from the board, citing unforeseen health issues, of course, and moved away shortly after her husband realized the $5,000 restitution was just the beginning of their financial and legal nightmare, but that whole ordeal, the fear, the confrontation, the fight for justice, it makes you think about power, doesn't it? The sheer audacity of people who believe a little badge or a title makes them exempt from the basic rules of decency and law. So, I have to ask you, have you ever dealt with a Rhonda or a Brett in your own neighborhood or apartment building? Someone who weaponized a minor position of authority to harass and intimidate others. How far would you have been willing to go to take them down? Drop a comment below and let me know your craziest HOA story, because sometimes the smallest battles for simple justice are the ones that are the most satisfying. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you think justice, even neighborhood justice, is always worth fighting for.